All right, we're here today with Dr. Larry Crabb, talking about some of the books that you've written. This has been a little bit of a series for us, and we're now going into a book that I had a chance to get involved with and write a chapter in. Kenny, your youngest son, my brother, also wrote a chapter, and then Grandpa co-wrote that book with you. And we just want to talk about that. It's titled God of My Fathers. Tell us a little bit about that book.
God of my father, singular.
God of my father.
God of my father.
Yeah.
The God that my father knew and served and let me see as his younger son, an example of what it means to trust the Lord when life doesn't work terribly well, and to trust the Lord when life does go well. Because life sometimes goes pretty well, you know. I look at my life right now, and I got all kind of blessings. Remember you asked me a question years ago. It stuck with me. You said to me, Pop, I don't get you. You got so much going for you. You know, you got a lovely wife, you love her, you got two good kids, you got two good daughters-in-law, you got grandkids, you got a ministry, you write books. How come you're miserable so much? Do you remember saying that?
I do.
Yeah, well, you did. Well, and I thought, I don't want to deny, and I don't want to fail to take advantage of the enjoyment of the blessings I have. Because I like my blessings, and I hope they continue. I want to make my marriage is good, and I like it, and I'm all grateful for it. I'm not miserable in my marriage. I'm happy in my marriage. I'm not miserable as a father to you and Kenny. I'm very happy and proud of both you guys tremendously. I think you have each of you has a wonderful wife, and you got gorgeous kids, and my life is just full of blessings. Why am I so miserable? Because in the core of my soul, and this is what my dad taught me. I think he taught me more this. He was the better teacher of this than anybody else I've ever had. That in the middle of life, you don't have what you most deeply want, and don't expect everything to go your way. But even when things don't go your way, you have a book to read and a person to trust. He was a man of the Bible.
No doubt.
My gosh. And one of the things I was so thrilled with, after my brother died, in 1991 in a plane crash, a commercial plane he was flying on, and he died. After he died, I was teaching in a master's program in counseling, and I was away from class for about 2 weeks doing all the things you have to do when a catastrophe like that takes place, arranging memorial services, whatever. And when I came back, and I sat in front of the students in a little lab group that we had, like 10 students that I was leading and counselor training, and they were all very awkward because their teacher had just lost his brother, and obviously I was in mourning.
Yeah.
And they wanted to ask me and be very solicitous and kind, which I appreciated. But they said, well, tell us how you're doing, Dr. Crabb. And I said a few things. And after a couple of minutes, I said, could we talk about something more important? And they were like, what? And I said, my brother's dead. It's horrible. But there's something more important than the fact that I'm grieving over my brother's loss. As real as that is, I'm not trying to hide from you. And I think Dad taught me that. What's more important? What God's doing now. What God can do and what good he can make out of my brother's death. What he can do in my soul because of the grief that I'm going through. And then one guy, I still recall who it was, he looked at me after I said that, and he said, every time I was so thrilled to hear this, he said, every time I picture you, Dr. Crabb, I picture you always come into class, and you sit in this lab group, you always have a Bible on your lap. And I thought, thanks, Dad. Because he always had a Bible on his lap.
Yeah, he did.
You know what led me to want to write a book called God of My Father? And the book is really a bit of a journal where Dad tells his story of what it was like when his father died when he was 5 years old. And how he was so angry as a 5-year-old kid because his father, he called Papa. His father was apparently a very good man. His name was Charles, and my grandfather, who I never knew. But I did read the letter of proposal he wrote to my grandmother, and that's in the book.
Yeah.
And he was very British, and I say that with great respect and great admiration, but very reserved. And he said, my dear Laura, I do believe that perhaps our sovereign Lord is wanting us to perhaps join lives in matrimony, and I would like you to consider the possibility of joining God's purposes together for the rest of our lives as husband and wife. And should you be open to this possibility, perhaps we can talk about it at some point as we continue to pray for God's leading in these matters. That's the gist of the letter.
Real smack of authenticity there.
And then
Romantic.
He signs it 2 X's and 2 O's at the bottom. Loves and kisses.
Yeah.
So he was just a very unusual, wonderful man, and Dad just loved him. But Dad had a friend, one of his buddies, whose father was a drunk, whose father beat this kid. And when my dad lost his dad, and his friend's father did not die, Dad, as a 5-year-old kid, said, it's not fair. As a 5-year-old kid, he's wrestling with this. God, what are you doing with my father?
Yeah.
Are you shaping him into my father?
Yeah.
And then I thought, I would like to let people know the impact that a father can have on a son. Let's write a book together, Dad.
Yeah.
And you tell me the story of your life, what it was like when your father died when you were 5, and you would write a chapter about that. Then I'd write a reaction to me as a son. What's it like to see my father talk about that? He tells the story. Let me just go on here for a second. This is important to me. He tells the story that when his father died, he died in the flu epidemic in the late 1900s, and they had just got a new church building, and there was no wiring for electricity, but my grandfather was apparently competent in those spheres, and he had the flu, and the flu epidemic, which was a very serious flu, and he spent the entire weekend wiring the entire week wiring the building so they could have lights for the Sunday service. And he was too sick, he shouldn't have done it. And that really cost him his life. And now he's lying in bed, and he's very sick. And my father's 5 years old. His brother, my Uncle Cecil, is 7. Aunt Mabel and Aunt Helen are 2 little girls, 3 and 1. And the 4 kids are gathered around the bed of their dying father. And his wife, Laura, my grandmother, was holding my grandfather's hand as he was dying, as he was unconscious. He was in a coma. And she was crying very quietly. And she kept on saying to her children, God is here. And then he woke up from his coma. He came to consciousness, and he turned to his wife, and she was crying gently, very quietly crying, but she was crying. And he very, very kindly, very gently, this could sound abrasive, but it wasn't, very quietly he said, looked at her and he said, hush, Laura, God is in it. And that became the slogan of our family. Hush, God is in it. And he tells that story, and then I tell the impact on me, and then he tells the story of his business difficulties and coming home one day, and I can recall this, I was probably 10, I don't know, a kid, and he said to Mother, and I overheard it, in great sadness, he said, I made a nickel today. And even back in those days, a nickel wasn't much. He didn't need to be making more to pay the mortgage and to buy the food and to do whatever, and he was so discouraged. His business was not going well, little business he started. And I'll never forget it. After he said that, he was so, so down. And then he said, oh, it's time to go to Bible study tonight. Why don't you just drink? Watch porn? I mean, I don't think I thought that as a 10-year-old kid, but do something to feel better. Watch a good television show. Do something. No, I want to open my Bible, and I want to know God in the middle of this. It's like, that's impressive. It's different. It's not how I naturally think. So the book is basically Dad's journal and my response to it.
When did Grandpa say, and I think you overheard this, and I can't remember the circumstance around it, but when did he say that the if it's all true line?
Another one of my landmarks in my relationship with Dad. Mother's father, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather,
who I'm named after.
That's right. Who lived with us in the last 4 or 5 years of his life after his wife, my grandmother, had died. And Grandpa, my mother's dad, lived with us for 4 or 5 years. And then he got very, very ill. And we had to place him in a nursing home for his last days. And I don't know where Bill was, my brother, but I was about 15, I think. And Mom and Dad were standing in front of my grandfather, who was lying in the bed in this nursing home. And he was semi-conscious. His eyes were open, but he couldn't speak. He was too far gone. And Dad was talking to him, to his father-in-law, Mother was sitting there just with tears in her eyes, and I'm behind watching this whole thing as a 15-year-old kid. This is my grandfather. He's dying. And Dad was talking to his father-in-law. He was saying words like this. I'll never forget it. This is not a quote, but it's mighty close. He said, are you aware of the presence of the Lord you've served so faithfully for all these years? Are you aware of his love? And are you aware that you're going to be with him for eternity, and everything you've lived for is about to take place? And Dad's saying all this stuff, and this is not a flannel graph lesson in Sunday school class. This is life. And I'm really just caught up in it. My gosh, this is true. This is the larger story of life in the middle of the death of a human being. And Grandpa made no response. He was too far gone. He couldn't kind of squeeze the hand. He couldn't wink. He couldn't smile. He just was too far gone. But no doubt he heard it. And then we left, and we're going down the steps. And I can still picture the long flight of steps down. And I'm walking behind Mom and Dad. And it's a rather sober moment, to say the least. And Dad turned to Mother, and this is the story that you're thinking of. Dad turned to Mother, and he said, Izzy, her name was Isabel, they called her Izzy. He said, Izzy, soon your father will be with the Lord, if it's all true. And I'm 15 years old. Wait a minute, that doesn't follow what I've just been part of. And I remember just saying, Dad, did you mean since it's all true? And he just got very quiet, and he said, no. He said, I'm placing all my hope in a book. And sometimes it's really hard. I believe it's true, and all I can pray is help my unbelief. That taught me something about the value of honest doubt. And when I began to doubt Christianity going into graduate school, that memory stayed with me. And I thought, I'm not going to be afraid of my doubt. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to celebrate it in some angry sense, but I'm going to embrace it and see where it goes. And I don't think you come to deep faith without significant doubt. Dad taught me that. I think the book, I'm sure it's kind of like, let me show you pictures of my grandkids, and if you don't know me, you're not too interested. And the book has not been my bestseller, but it's one of the most important books for my soul that I've written.
Where do you think and maybe you know this, where did your dad gain his love of the Bible?
I've never been asked that question. And I don't know the answer. Let me think for just a second here. Where did Dad gain his love for the Bible? Dad was very literary. He loved to read. He read all the time. And I believe that, and this is just occurring to me now, my grandmother, who was a widow for many, many years before she died, Dad has told me this, and I had forgotten this until you asked the question, that he would come down as a kid from upstairs in their little tiny house and get ready for school, and his mother, my grandmother, was sitting at the kitchen table and had poured a cup of tea and had the cereal out for the children, and she always had a Bible on the table. She was always reading her Bible. And she was always praying with the Bible in front of her. I'd never thought of it. That might be one of the things that Dad noticed and thought, I wonder what that's all about. You see, I don't think I think we're shaped most profoundly by people we respect whose lives puzzle us. What is my mother, my mother, who's a widow, and I'm a 16-year-old kid, and she's got 1,000 things to do. We have no money. She's raising chickens just to be able to have some eggs to feed us for breakfast. And that's true. They were in deep poverty. And here she is reading her Bible. What good does that do when you got to get some bucks, a couple $10 to feed my kids breakfast today? Go out and do something. Clean a house. Make some money. Don't spend the time with your Bible, for crying out loud. And I think he was puzzled by that. I think he was drawn to it. That's part of the answer, I think.
Well, what it reminds me is that I know in previous podcasts you've talked about the place that confusion has played in just throwing you into the story. But I know you've oftentimes talked almost like a flip side of the coin is curiosity. And that's provoked more
by confusion.
Yes,
that's a great way to put it. Confusion provokes curiosity, and I think curiosity is the lost art of the American church. And not just about each other, but about life and about God. And I think Dad was incessantly curious and thinking that the Bible was really the book to look at for him to study. And one of the things that strikes me here, he loved commentaries. He had a library full of commentaries of all the great thinkers from the past who had studied the Bible and knew the Greek and the Hebrew and all that. But I remember when about maybe in the last 10 years of his life, he said to me, I've made a decision. I'm not going to read any more commentaries. I want to go straight to what God has said all the time for the rest of my life. Not that he wasn't dismissing the importance of commentaries in earlier days. But I find myself still reading commentaries, but just a little bit less maybe. Maybe in the pattern of my father. So yeah, the God of my father, it's a rather important thing. And Dad was very open to writing it with me. And it was a bit of a bonding time.
Yeah.
Pretty important to me. And I think if the book has value to others, I know that it has value to me, but if it has value to others, maybe it could inspire hope, sadness if you didn't have a father who trusted God in the middle of difficult times. And in good times, he knew how to have fun. He was a fun guy in a lot of crazy ways.
Funny.
Remember one day we were getting ready to go to church, and we were all dressed up, and Mother came out. She had on her dress, and I had on my, decent shirt, whatever. And Dad had on the old hat, the Elliot Ness type hat, and he had on his tie and sport coat and socks and shoes and no pants. And he said, "Let's go." And I said, "Dad, you forgot your pants." He said, "Oh my goodness, I forgot my pants."
Yeah.
So,
yeah, he was funny.
He was able just to laugh in the middle of life because he knew that there was a center to his life, and it was Christ.
Yeah.
So,
What a legacy.
meaningful book for me, and maybe if others read it, they will realize not only that they didn't have that kind of a father, perhaps, but they could be that to somebody else.
Yeah.
We all can be that to somebody, whether we're married, whether we have fathers, we got somebody in our life that we could demonstrate the power of God to find joy and survive in the middle of difficult times.
Well,
that's what the book's about.
And I feel a great privilege to actually kind of sit in that legacy. I'm sitting between another father and son who the ripples are still extending.
Yeah.
And I know your kids well enough to know that those ripples are still going.
No doubt.
And I'm really drawn to the fact that that you tried to do it right early. You tried to do it with the overhead projector and the things that you used, but at some point, the techniques failed.
Yeah.
And speak about your own fathering with the few minutes we have left, about your own fathering of what it was like to think of a legacy you had and passing it forward.
That's why I wrote the book.
Yeah.
I know the impact of somebody who lives the faith. And I know how weakly, how poorly, and that's not false humility, how weakly and poorly I live the faith. But if there's one thing I hope that is said at my funeral, he didn't quit.
Yeah. That will be said.
He struggled.
Yeah.
He was a mess at times. Rachel could say I failed her. Kep could say I failed him. Kenny could say I failed him. And I have, and I will. But my failures didn't discourage me to the point where I said, I'm done.
Yeah.
There's still a God, and I'm going to trust him and go to my death believing in him.
Yeah.
Guys, thanks for letting me talk about my dad. I appreciate the time.
Thank you.